Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio podcast, powered by the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. I'm your host, Jerry Scott, and my goal is to give you answers to your cross-border questions, to ease the stress of a cross-border move or extended trip, and to keep you up to date on all you need to know with cross-border rules and regulations. Now let's get on with the show. Well, welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio podcast. Today we've got a very timely topic. Now, I say that every time when we have a guest on the podcast, and Robert is a returning guest, and we've talked about renouncing for Americans that are living in Canada many times. We're going to be talking about the advantages and the disadvantages. Are there any advantages? Are there any disadvantages? Careful what I say.
Well, let me expand. It's not only for Americans living in Canada, it can be Americans living anywhere abroad, right? Australia, New Zealand, Europe. As long as you're a U.S. citizen and you live abroad, have a second passport, generally it's something that can be accomplished, right? So, you mentioned disadvantages. Really, one of the big disadvantages is once you no longer are a U.S. person, U.S. citizen, then there's no automatic right of reentry into the United States. You're basically at the mercy of the admitting officer, right? The Customs and Border Protection officer. That's going to give you a brief interview once you arrive. So luckily, Canada is one of, I think, 32 countries that enjoy a visa waiver with the United States. So its citizens don't have to get pre-approval, like apply for a visa in order to enter the United States. So in that situation, even for folks that have renounced their U.S. citizenship, they're still free to enter the United States. Not a problem.
Well, it's interesting. As we were talking about this podcast today, I don't know if you ever heard the book called Take Your Money and Run. It's written by a fellow named Alex Doyles. I think it was written in the early 90s. Well, Alex is actually going to be on the podcast on, let me think about this. I think it's August the 30th, if that's a Wednesday. And we've come up with a new topic because Alex did take his money and run and sailed around the world for 15 years. But now there really is a trend where Canadians are coming home who may have the dual citizenship. And of course, our theme with the podcast with Alex is take your money and come home.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm seeing a lot of that. Lots of Americans, they've been in the United States for decades in some cases. They're eligible. Perhaps their spouse is Canadian citizen, also a dual U.S., having most of the time naturalized as a U.S. person. There's a visa waiting for them here in Canada, and they choose to retire to Canada. And like you say, they have money, means, wealth, and they typically bring that with them back to Canada, right?
I would have to think when we are dealing with U.S. persons that move up to Canada or Canadians that do come home and they have the dual citizenship, there is fear and there's a lot of worrying. And so maybe we should really cover that off. When a person does move from the United States or comes back to Canada and they do have a U.S. citizenship, what is the number one thing that they seem to be fearful of? And should they be fearful if they want to renounce?
Well, typically they're fearful of the IRS, when in my view, if they're returning to Canada, they're going to be subject to much higher rates of tax in Canada as opposed to the United States. Of course, there's always a caveat to that. It really depends on which state they're moving in from. With California, New York, Oregon, Hawaii, some of those states being high tax states, right? Also, they want to know the type of investments which don't align with, say, Canadian tax rules, or Canadian investments that don't align with U.S. rules. Oftentimes, they have questions about their Social Security, Medicare, their U.S. pensions, maybe 401ks, IRAs, defined benefit from their employers. And so they just, they have questions, concerns about how will the U.S. tax those pensions once they become full-fledged Canadian tax residents, and how Canada will tax, and how the treaty plays or intervenes and provides relief as far as taxation and avoidance of double taxation.
Now, for some of those Americans that do come home or those Canadians that do come home, there is thresholds where we cover off being a covered expat
That's
or a
correct.
non-covered expat. And those numbers are, I believe it's 2 million for an individual and 4 million as a couple. Now, are you seeing more people that are under the 4 million? Is it more advantageous for them to renounce?
Well, it's certainly a personal preference, right? We have clients, they don't want to renounce, right? They're quite happy with being dual nationals. Maybe they spend months at a time in the United States, or they're just happy with their citizenship. Other clients, they want to renounce their U.S. citizenship. It seems like yesterday, if they had the choice, right? So what we do is we look into it. We make sure that one, they're a dual citizen. They have a valid Canadian passport or a second, in some cases, a third citizenship. You don't want to be only a U.S. person. You won't get past the start tape if you only have, for example, if you're a U.S. person, U.S. citizen, but you're only a lawful permanent resident here in Canada. Secondly, we look at their taxes. Part of being a covered expat includes not being compliant with the U.S. tax system. So if they're not compliant, we look at getting them compliant first, whether it's through a streamlined process or basically just maybe getting a couple of years prepared and filed with the IRS. And then third is the amount of federal tax that they've owed over the past 5 or so years. And if it's over a certain threshold, then they will be considered covered. If it's under, then they won't. And I believe the threshold is somewhere in the range of about 150,000 US annually.
Now, what is the mindset and what kind of what is the level for these people right now? Are they, with the current administration and all the color that's around it, are these people just fed up? They've had enough? Are you seeing an uptick with Americans coming
I,
home back to?
I think a lot of it is people, that's part of it. It's definitely political. Many are not happy with the current administration. They're not happy with what is going on in the United States, whether it's, ICE enforcing immigration rules for those that are, you know, construction workers or agricultural workers. So part of it is political. Part of it is the need to simplify, right? Because as you know, as a U.S. person, if you live in Canada, if you really live abroad, not necessarily Canada, but a foreign country, you still have to continue filing your U.S. Income tax returns as well as information forms. And that can be quite burdensome, and often it's very expensive to do. So, they're not necessarily avoiding tax. Generally speaking, these folks don't owe any federal tax, right? But they have a mountain of compliance that they have to get through annually, which costs them a lot of money. And so many more, I would say, base their decision on that or a combination thereof.
How much is their financial advisor influencing them to say you're a dual citizen? Hey, you want to become just a Canadian citizen because your estate is going to be a mess to settle because we're dealing with two countries.
Yeah, no, I've had that. It also plays into like crystallizations of corporations. Those are unique under the Canadian system. They don't exist under the U.S. system. So, there can be issues around those, right? And so, oftentimes I'll get a recommendation and from a client, and they were directed or steered my way from maybe their financial planner or maybe the estate lawyer, right? They got wind that it's a U.S. person, and they refer over to explore the tax implications as well as possibly the immigration as well.
So a person starts this process. I want to leave the United States, or let's just say, in for the argument, these people are actually living in Canada, they're dual citizens. But do they ever get to the point where they start going through the process and then they put the brakes on it because the exit tax might be too much, or?
I've never had that situation. They're firm in their convictions and in their mind that they're going to do it. They execute it and they see it through to the bitter end.
Okay, before they start talking to someone like yourself, where is a lot of this information available?
The information is available, on the web. I mean, there's not a whole lot. Um, I have clients that they'll do a Google search and they'll read about how to renounce, what's required. Once they get a look at the forms, procedures, as well as what's required on the tax side of things, they throw the towel in and then they call a professional that can see them through. It's not the simplest of procedures, in particular on the tax side. You need to really have your filings in proper working order. Complete is what that form 8854 reads, complete income tax filings, which includes all schedules and information reporting, right?
Okay,
So that's oftentimes that's where they'll call us, right?
I just finished watching this podcast. I'm excited. Rob seems like a really honest guy. So my first step is I pick up the phone and I give you a call and take me through that process.
Well, for sure. I mean, the first thing I look for is this just kind of a knee-jerk reaction from something maybe they read or watched on TV or listened to, right? Very first thing, because I make it a point that this is irrevocable, right? You're giving up your citizenship. You're not going to get it back, right? So you have to be absolutely certain this is what you want to do, right? Then we look further. We look at the compliance on the tax side, ensure that they are indeed dual citizens. We really look for motive and intent. We look for duress, anyone trying to force them into doing this, maybe a spouse, maybe a parent, anyone else, right? It has to be voluntary decision on the part of the renunciant, right? And then after that, we basically give them, basically the grade, what we see, issues, what we see, the outcomes, right, of the renunciation. So oftentimes for higher net worth individuals, we have to do some planning ahead of time, right? Because, maybe they're slightly over that $2 million threshold. There's nothing in the code that says you can't plan. So we can plan. It might take a couple of years. But the sooner you start planning for it, the sooner you'll be able to renounce. And oftentimes it's in coordination with getting the clients caught back up in their taxes.
Now, how many times do you come across these families that do plan? And we've always said that if we could ever intercept a Canadian 3 to 5 years before they want to move back to Canada and maybe utilize the backdoor Roth strategy, these different things, how effective can that be if a person really did take their time before they came back to Canada and then they gave up their U.S. citizenship?
Oh, it can be. Yeah, it definitely can be effective, right? It can be effective in situations where the person renunciating U.S. citizenship is married to a non-U.S. person. Maybe that person only had a green card, right? So we can, if there's a married couple or say a green card couple, not U.S. citizens, but where green cards left Canada, need to abandon those green cards before they abandon. Again, if they were green card holders for 8 or more years, we need to look through it because that same 8854 requirement applies to them as equally as it does to a U.S. citizen. So, but again, we can plan individually. One can do it, renounce. Then in a year or two, the other can renounce once we have planned around, with respect to their assets and holdings.
Now, I mean, everybody loves their country. We love Canada if you're a Canadian and American, loving United States. It must be really difficult emotionally for them to say, because now you're giving up your U.S. passport.
Well, it is and it isn't. I think it's a little bit easier to digest for those Canadians who were born in Canada. possibly moved to the United States, obtained a green card, citizenship, and now they've returned to Canada. Or Canadians born in Canada, maybe to a U.S. citizen parent or parents, had their birth registered abroad at the consulate, in Canada, and were dual citizens since birth. So I think in that respect, it's a little bit more palatable for them. In particular, folks that were actually born in Canada, maybe to U.S. citizen parents, right? They've never lived in the U.S. They've never worked in the U.S. Their extended families all in Canada. Their jobs are in Canada. So really, their connection to the United States is minimal at best, right? Now, for someone who was born and raised in Los Angeles, right, it might be a little bit more difficult, right, to digest for that person, right? So, but again, I've seen it, right? I've seen it all.
Now, is there the fear that mom and dad are going to renounce? They're going to be in Canada. They're just going to be Canadian citizens, and then they have their children living in the States. Is there fear that they're not going to be able? They're going to have problems when they go across the border to visit their kids?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, obviously, it's probably in the back of their minds, right? With what we're seeing, news reports about Canadians being, incarcerated or turned away, denied entry into the United States. That can always happen. But keep in mind, renouncing one's U.S. citizenship, it is a constitutional right. It's found in the United States Code, and it is not a reason for being barred from entering the United States. If you do it for tax purposes, that is. However, the clients I've handled, very few have owed substantial amounts of money to the IRS. So, it certainly can't be perceived as the product of, say, tax avoidance, right?
There's a couple things that people think about are in this current administration. Is there fear that they might, when you say it's your constitutional right, well, that seems to kind of go against this current administration when there is no constitution. And I apologize for sharing my views.
Well,
But is that fearful that this might no longer, people won't have the opportunity to renounce?
No, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Again, it's ingrained in the Constitution. But one thing that could happen is possibly they'll have more difficulty transiting between the United States and Canada as a Canadian citizen. Now, I have not heard of anybody that's had issues with that, right? Post renunciation. I have heard of issues where, Canadians are planning a wedding. It was recently on the news, right? Canadian citizen lives in Ontario, bride lives in New York, and then he goes to the border and they ask, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to get married." Denied, right? Because the presumption is that he's going to marry a U.S. person in the United States and he'll stay in the United States permanently. So he's going to have to address that on the immigration side, right? But as far as being denied entry because you renounced, I've never heard it.
Okay.
Never heard of it.
Now, what about some of these people when they come to us? They say, "Listen, I heard that if I renounce, I'm going to lose my Social Security."
No, you won't lose Social Security. Your 401ks are intact. IRAs, those are yours. You earned it, and you're going to get it.
Okay, so let's quickly summarize. Is renouncing for everybody?
I don't think so. Not at all. It's a real personal decision. You have to be prepared to do it, and it's not for everybody, right? Those folks that call me, in their minds, they've already made up their minds. I mean, what I typically will do is try to talk them out of it, right? Give them the benefits, give them the issues that one could experience by not being a U.S. person, and ultimately let them decide, right? No pressure from me, right? It's entirely their choice, and they'll go through it. What I do advise them is, again, issues that could occur, right? Maybe transiting into the United States. There could be maybe issues at the border. Again, I haven't seen those, not based solely on renouncing U.S. citizenship, right? But those are obviously issues given who's given the current administration and their view on immigration policy and laws. I mean, I could see it happening, but as of yet, it hasn't. I haven't heard of any instances.
Well, I have to think that if a person was in their 40s and they wanted to renounce, it would be less common. But it's got to be somebody who's in their 60s or elderly that is.
It is. It's generally older folks. They've spent years in the United States. Now they've moved back to Canada and they've reestablished themselves here. And then they wish to no longer be U.S. citizens, along with all of the tax and other regulatory requirements that affix to that citizenship, right? So again, it's kind of an attempt to simplify one's life once they've returned to Canada and they have zero intent of ever returning to the United States on a full-time basis, let alone even a part-time.
How
Yeah.
long does this process take from the time that I pick up the phone, give Rob a call, who's located in beautiful Victoria on Vancouver Island? How long does that process take?
Well, the process typically takes maybe 2 to 3 weeks beginning to end. And then to schedule an appointment at one of the consulates in Canada, it can take as few as, say, 3 months, as long as maybe 9 months. Really depends on where one wants to have the renunciation ceremony. If it's in Vancouver, that tends to be a little bit busier than, say, Halifax or Ottawa, right?
Because we're hearing the term
So
called renouncing holidays, where people actually go overseas because the wait to get into renounce is like you say, less than Vancouver or
that's correct. And Argentina seems to be a spot. Frankfurt was at least last year, right? So Argentina, you can get in as early as 2 weeks. I think it's very, very rapid, right? So that's definitely a possibility. Frankfurt, Germany. The State Department will advise which embassies have basically the capacity for folks that aren't located in that particular region or country for renunciation ceremonies. So it is possible. If you're really in a hurry, it can get done quickly. Likely won't get done in Canada, but it can be done in other U.S. consular postings or even embassies abroad.
Now, we've always told people this is not a do-it-yourself podcast. Have you ever seen people try and do this on their own?
They've completely revamped the procedures as of I believe it was November, and once again they revamped as of June 30th. There was a executive order that made a few changes to the renunciation process. I've seen folks that have done it themselves. Most don't. They look at the forms. They can't figure it out per se. And then they call in for professional assistance.
Now,
Yep.
does anybody ever get denied? Like they, just because of lack of information, or as we say, they tried to do it themselves and they get denied?
Well, if you base your, the claim of renunciation on like an act of for example, being the Pope, for example, right? He's the head of state for the Vatican. So if you're head of state of a foreign country, you served or serving in a foreign military, you work for a foreign military, those are considered relinquishing acts, right? So you can either base it on renunciation, where you affirmatively state, "Look, I'm going to take an oath of renunciation. I'm out," or you can pursue the other relinquishment based on prior relinquishing acts. I've seen petitions rejected based on the relinquishing acts for want of supporting documentation. So whether you're going to relinquish or renounce, in my opinion, because the tax filing requirements remain the same, it's far better to renounce rather than to attempt a relinquishment, in my view.
Okay, so this renouncing is obviously keeping you pretty busy, but outside of renouncing, what are some of the other services that you're providing for in the cross-border space for your clients?
Well, as far as my accounting, we do, for example, for folks that are looking to renounce, maybe they haven't filed tax returns in years. So the IRS has programs such as streamlined filings, right? Where we can get them caught up. We can get those 5 years done prior to the year that they're going to renounce. And then we'll do their 6th filing, which includes that magic form 8854. Others, maybe they need a year or two. Or I've had this as of late. They're renouncing, but they need someone to do to help them on the tax side of things for this year and then their final year, because maybe their own personal tax practitioner isn't familiar with the final dual status tax return of a person who has renounced. Yeah. And then also, in addition, I mean, my immigration practice is based out of Seattle. And so what we're finding a lot of are U.S. citizenship acquisition claims, right? Maybe these guys are, they're perceived as being undocumented, but perhaps they were born outside of the United States to a U.S. citizen parent or parents. If they live in the United States, we can help. If they don't, we can certainly help as well, and we can help them claim their U.S. citizenship. Those are other files that I work on as well.
And your guys' offices are located in...
Immigration is down on 2nd Avenue in Seattle, Washington, right downtown in Belltown.
And then you also have your office in Victoria?
For tax side, yeah, I work up here.
Okay, and then you also have offices on the Lower Mainland here as well?
We do.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. So you guys are... You've got the...
most of the work completed is always done remotely, as we're doing today, right? You don't have to go to someone's office. If they want to come down, no problem, right? But typically it's done remotely.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I appreciate your time today, Rob. We were on the island last week. We'll probably be spending more time on Vancouver Island as well. So we look forward to making that dusty trail down to Victoria.
Absolutely.
But other than that, I appreciate your time. We enjoy working with your group. Excuse me. So truly appreciate your time and your expertise. And how do people get a hold of you if they need to? Is there a number you want to give everybody, or is there an email that you'd like to put out there?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they can call me at area code 206-406-6160. That's the direct line, or they can email me at rclegg, C-L-E-G-G, at clegglawgroup.com.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I appreciate your time and thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you again. It was great.
Okay, take care. Thank you again for listening to the Snowbird Expat Radio podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is to forward the episode to a friend, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Now, before you go, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Be kind to all, the world is small.